Before we begin, if you're listening to this alone at night, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained events uploaded every day. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get into tonight's stories. Churches change after dark. During the day, they're filled with voices, families, music, footsteps echoing through long aisles. After sunset, everything becomes still. The stained glass windows fade into black mirrors. The pews sit empty. Even the smallest sounds seem louder than they should. For nearly 3 years, I worked as the evening caretaker for a small church in rural Pennsylvania. My job was simple: lock the doors, turn off the lights, prepare everything for Sunday morning. Most nights, I was the last person in the building. Until one Friday, I heard someone enter the confessional, after every door had already been locked. The strange part wasn't hearing the door close. It was that, when I checked, the church was completely empty. This happened during the fall of 2023. The church had stood for more than a century. Old wooden pews, stone walls, a narrow bell tower, one small confessional beside the sanctuary. It wasn't a large parish. Most evenings, only a handful of people stopped by to pray. By 8 o'clock, everyone was usually gone. Every closing shift followed the same routine. Walk the hallways, turn off classroom lights, check the basement, lock every entrance, then make one final walk through the sanctuary. Simple, predictable. One Friday, rain fell steadily outside. The last parishioner left just before closing. I watched her drive away, locked the front doors, checked every window. Everything looked normal. As I crossed the sanctuary, I heard it, a wooden door slowly closing. Not the front entrance, the confessional. Very softly, click. I stopped walking. The sound echoed through the empty church. Reasonable explanation. The old wood shifted with humidity. At least initially. I walked toward the confessional. The curtain on one side hung perfectly still. The small door on the other side stood closed. I cleared my throat. Hello? No answer. I opened the door. The booth was empty. Only the small kneeler. A shelf. The faint scent of old wood. Nothing else. I shrugged, closed the door, continued locking the building. The following Friday, it happened again. Same time. Same soft click. Same empty confessional. By the third week, I stopped believing it was the wood. Curiosity won. Instead of leaving, I sat quietly in the last pew. The church lights remained dim. Only candles near the altar still burned. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows. At exactly 8:17 p.m., the confessional door opened. Slowly, then closed again. No footsteps. No voices. Just the sound of someone entering. I waited several minutes. Finally, I walked forward. The booth was empty, except a folded piece of paper rested on the kneeler. I was certain it hadn't been there earlier. The note contained only one sentence. Thank you for listening. No signature. No handwriting I recognized. The following Sunday, I mentioned it to the parish priest. He listened quietly, then asked, "Did you hear only one door?" I hadn't mentioned that. He looked toward the sanctuary. Years earlier, before the church had been renovated, the confessional included 2 separate entrances. One for the priest, one for the visitor. During construction, one entrance was permanently sealed behind a wall. Officially, only one door remained. Mostly, several weeks later, a heavy storm caused a brief power outage. Emergency lights illuminated the sanctuary with a pale glow. Everything else disappeared into darkness. At exactly 8:17, the confessional door creaked open. This time, I stayed where I was. A calm voice came from inside, barely louder than a whisper. "Forgive me." The sentence stopped. Silence returned. A few seconds later, another voice answered. Gentle, patient. "You already have." I wasn't close enough to understand anything else. When I finally approached, the confessional stood empty again. On the small shelf rested another folded note. This one read, "Lock the door after you leave." Every hair on my arm stood up. I folded the paper, placed it in my pocket, locked the church, went home. The next morning, the note had disappeared. Months later, The church began restoring part of the old sanctuary. Workers removed damaged plaster behind the confessional. Hidden inside the wall, they discovered the outline of the original second doorway, still intact beneath layers of brick, carved into the old wooden frame. Almost hidden beneath dust were 4 simple words: "Peace be with you." No one knew who had carved them, or when. The restoration covered the doorway again. The wall was sealed. The church looked exactly as it always had. I eventually left that job. Another caretaker took my place. Before my final shift ended, I handed him the keys. He asked if there was anything unusual he should know. I almost told him. Instead, I simply smiled. "Make sure every door is locked before you leave." He laughed. Thought I was joking. I hope he never works a Friday night alone. Because somewhere inside that old church, after the last prayer has been whispered, someone still steps quietly into the confessional to finish a conversation that no one else can hear. Churches have routines. The doors open at the same time. The bells ring on schedule. The candles are lit before every service. At least, they're supposed to be. For nearly 5 years, I volunteered as the church sexton. My responsibilities were simple: unlock the building, prepare the sanctuary, light the candles, welcome the first visitors. Every Sunday morning, I was the first person inside, or so I believed, because every week, one candle was already burning, not in the sanctuary, in a small side chapel that had been locked for years. The strange part wasn't the flame. It was that I was the only person who had the key. This happened during the spring of 2023. The church sat on a quiet hillside in Western Virginia, built in the early 1900s. Stone walls, wooden beams, colored stained glass. Most of the building remained unchanged for decades. A narrow prayer chapel stood beside the main sanctuary. Years earlier, water damage forced the church to close it indefinitely. The room stayed locked, unused, forgotten. Every Sunday, I arrived around 6:30, long before the choir, long before the pastor, long before sunrise. I unlocked the front doors, switched on the lights, prepared the altar. Routine, predictable. Then one morning, I noticed light beneath the locked chapel door. Soft, flickering, like candlelight. Reasonable explanation? Sunlight through stained glass. At least initially. I unlocked the door. The room was empty. Dust covered the wooden floor. Every pew sat untouched. Only one candle burned quietly beside the old altar. The flame stood perfectly still. No draft. No smoke. Just burning. I extinguished it. Locked the room. Thought nothing more of it. The following Sunday, the candle burned again. Same place. Same steady flame. Again, the room showed no footprints. No signs anyone had entered. Weeks passed. Every Sunday, the same candle waited for me. Already lit. Eventually, I replaced it with a brand new candle, still sealed in its original wrapping. The next Sunday, the wrapper lay neatly folded on the altar. The new candle burned brightly. Curiosity got the better of me. One Saturday evening, instead of going home, I remained inside the church. The building emptied. The last parishioner left. Darkness settled outside. I locked every entrance, checked every window, then quietly waited in the sanctuary. Midnight came. Nothing happened. 1 o'clock. Silence. 2. Still nothing. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not loud, measured, walking across the old wooden floor, toward the locked chapel. I hurried into the hallway. Nobody. The footsteps continued anyway. They stopped directly behind the chapel door. Then, very softly, I heard the scratch of a match being struck. A single flame appeared beneath the door. Golden light filled the gap. I unlocked the chapel immediately. The room stood empty. The candle burned quietly on the altar. A faint scent of fresh wax lingered in the air. Beside the candle rested a folded prayer card. I unfolded it. Only one sentence had been written inside. Keep the light burning. No signature. The next morning, I showed the card to the parish priest. He became unusually quiet, then asked, "Did it happen before dawn?" I hadn't mentioned the time. He nodded slowly. Many decades earlier, the small chapel had remained open 24 hours a day. Travelers stopped there before sunrise to pray. One elderly caretaker reportedly lit a single candle every Sunday morning, long before anyone else arrived. After he passed away, the practice quietly disappeared. Officially, anyway, mostly. Months later, the church began restoring the old chapel. Workers removed damaged wood behind the altar. Hidden inside the wall, they discovered a small brass candle holder. Its surface had blackened with age. Engraved into the base were 4 simple words: "Let it never darken." No one knew who had written them. The candle holder was cleaned, returned to the altar. The chapel reopened later that year. Something else changed too. From that day forward, the mysterious candle never appeared already lit again. Until my final Sunday before moving away. I arrived before sunrise one last time. Unlocked the chapel. The candle was burning, brighter than ever. Beside it, rested another folded prayer card. Inside, only 4 words were written: "Thank you for coming." When I looked up, the flame gently flickered once, then quietly went out on its own. I never saw it happen again. Sometimes, when I visit an old church early in the morning, I look toward the side chapels before the service begins. Most are dark, most are empty, most candles wait for someone to light them. Most. But every now and then, one small flame is already burning, as though someone arrived long before the first key ever touched the lock. Church bells are predictable. They ring before services, for weddings, for funerals, for holidays. People notice when they ring. They notice even more when they ring at midnight. For nearly 4 years, I worked as the caretaker of a small mountain church. The bell tower had been closed long before I was hired. The staircase inside had partially collapsed. The old bell rope had been removed. No one had entered the tower in years. Yet every night, at exactly 12 o'clock, the bell rang once. Never twice. Never early. Never late. The strange part wasn't the sound. It was that, every morning, the old bell rope hung a little lower than it had the day before. This happened during the autumn of 2024. The church stood on the edge of a small town in the Appalachian Mountains. It had been there for well over a century. Stone walls, wooden pews, a tall bell tower visible for miles. Visitors loved photographing it. If you ever asked why the tower door stayed permanently locked, my duties were simple. Open the church each morning. Keep the grounds clean. Lock everything after evening prayer. Most nights, I was alone. The first time I heard the bell, I assumed someone in town was playing a prank. Reasonable enough, at least initially. Exactly midnight. One deep chime, then silence. The next morning, I checked the tower door. The old brass padlock remained untouched. Dust covered the threshold. No footprints. Nothing. The following night, the bell rang again. Exactly 12. One single chime. This time, I stood outside, looking directly at the tower. The bell moved. I saw it, just once, as though someone had pulled it from inside, but no one appeared in the windows. Weeks passed. Every night, one bell. Every morning, the frayed end of the old bell rope hung slightly farther through the ceiling opening above the sanctuary. Only an inch or 2 at a time. No one else seemed to notice. One evening, I mentioned it to the oldest member of the congregation. Before I finished, he quietly asked, "Still only once?" I hadn't mentioned the number of chimes. He nodded slowly. According to local tradition, the original caretaker rang the bell once at midnight whenever someone in town needed prayers. No records explained how he knew. After he died, the midnight ringing reportedly stopped. Officially, anyway, mostly, curiosity eventually got the better of me. One Saturday night, I stayed inside the church. All the lights were off except a single lamp near the altar. Rain tapped softly against the stained glass windows. The building felt impossibly still. At exactly 11:59, I heard something above me. Not the bell. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Crossing the wooden floor inside the sealed tower. Impossible. The staircase no longer reached the top. The footsteps stopped. Midnight arrived. The bell rang. One deep, powerful note echoed through the church. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. The old bell rope dropped another few inches, swinging gently, though there wasn't any wind. Then, a voice drifted down from the darkness above. Soft, calm. "Is everyone here?" I couldn't answer. The silence that followed felt heavier than the bell itself. Then, very slowly, the rope began to rise again. Pulled upward, out of sight, the footsteps returned. Walking away, everything became quiet. The next morning, I unlocked an old storage room beneath the tower. Tucked behind broken hymnals and worn-out chairs, I found a faded ledger belonging to caretakers from decades earlier. Most entries described routine maintenance, replacing roof tiles, repairing pews, cleaning windows. The final handwritten page was different. It contained only one sentence. When the bell rings on its own, count who answers. No signature, no date. Several months later, the church received funding to restore the bell tower. Engineers removed damaged flooring, installed new supports, built a safe staircase. For the first time in decades, people reached the bell again. The old bronze bell looked exactly as expected, except for one detail. The clapper was disconnected. It had been removed years earlier. Without it, the bell couldn't ring, not even once. No one could explain the midnight chimes. The restoration finished. The tower reopened. The old rope was replaced. Everything looked new. My final night as caretaker arrived a week later. I locked the church one last time, walked across the empty sanctuary, paused beneath the tower. Midnight came. The new bell never rang. Instead, from somewhere high above, I heard a single pull on the old rope, even though the old rope had been removed. As I stepped outside, I looked back at the tower. For just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing beside the bell, not waving, not moving, simply watching the church below. When lightning briefly lit the sky, the figure was gone. I handed over my keys the following morning. Never told the new caretaker about the midnight bell. Some stories don't help anyone sleep better. Now, whenever I pass an old church late at night, I always listen. Most bell towers stay silent until morning. Most bells only ring when someone pulls the rope. Most. But every now and then, just after midnight, a single bell echoes across the hills. And somewhere, someone is still making sure. Every soul who needs to be remembered is counted.